because rabies virus itself doesn't live out on the counter or the doorknobs or anything like that. You can't get it just from the environment. It actually has to be kind of injected into you from saliva. And so you have to have a real event happen to get the virus into you. So it could be either through a bite, or we think there might be a risk if you have an open scratch or you get some saliva into your mucous membranes like an eyeball or a mouth. So if you don't wash your hands properly and then potentially touch your eye or something like that after contacting the animal. But it's not airborne and it's not that easily transmissible at all. Currently, I think a lot of people in the state of Arkansas might be familiar with raccoons, it seems like. And here in the state of Arkansas, we don't see rabies in raccoons, but what we see is them stumbling around and coming into yards and wandering around in the daytime. And that's actually, not to confuse things, but typically caused by a different virus. But if you think, called distemper virus, but if you think about that, that's what is happening. So with our skunks right now, they're getting into dog pens. And if you think about it, a normal skunk wouldn't want or have a need to really get into a pen with dogs. And so it's getting in there because it's sick in the head. It's got, it's infected in the brain, and it kind of makes them crazy. It's not always the disease that causes the foaming at the mouth and the aggression that people think of with Cujo or something like that. It can be a disease where it causes them to just be kind of tired and sick. So like one of the skunks was just kind of ambling down the road, minding his own business, but it was the middle of the day, and that's not normal behavior. But then other times the skunks are getting into the pens, like I said, with the dog, or we've had some people being charged at by the skunks. And so that is definitely not normal behavior as well, because they should be afraid of humans. If they're not afraid of you, then they may be sick as well. And then as far as the bats go, so bats are nocturnal animals and they like to fly at night, and you'll see them, flying around catching insects and stuff. And that's normal. But if you find a bat on the ground or you can pick up the bat and handle it, then that's probably not a normal behavior. That means that something is probably wrong with that bat. And it may be rabies and it may not. So not all bats have rabies and not all skunks have rabies. But it's just any sort of abnormal animal behavior. If a skunk that has rabies bites your dog, it's going to take a little bit of time for that virus to travel from the point of the bite, which is an injection, think of like a needle injection. It's injecting that virus, and then it travels up the nerves. So it's going to go from, let's say it's in the tip of the foot. It's going to go from the tip of the foot, and it takes a little bit of time to travel up those nerves to get to the brain. And it has to get to the brain before it can come out into the saliva to be spread. So the first half of that travel is called incubation. So the virus is kind of incubating in the body. And then when it hits the brain, and then it goes down the nerves into the salivary glands, into the mouth. That's the infectious period. So the animal has to be infected in the brain before it can be infectious to other people. And it can take several months for that to develop. So at that whole time, though, up until it gets into the brain, the animal is not infectious. It cannot transmit the virus to anyone until it gets into the brain. Once it's in the brain, the animal's sick, and so then they're going to die within a few days. So really, it's only during that time period that virus is in the brain and getting into the saliva that they can spread it to anything else. But they will already be sick, and they will unfortunately succumb to the disease pretty quickly after that. You can call law enforcement or your veterinarian to get information on what to do before you take action is your best option. And they can always call the health department. Somebody will be available for questions 24 hours a day. Usually that somebody is me, so.
Contact her.
Yes.
So there are ways of preventing rabies.
Yes.
Let's talk about that
Yes.
real quickly.
Yes, so we have some very effective vaccines for rabies in dogs and cats and livestock as well. We did have a cow with rabies last year, so it can get into other mammals. There are some ways to mitigate that in the other animals, but with dogs and cats specifically, it's very important to have them up to date on regular vaccinations and the state laws that it's required to be given by a licensed veterinarian. And the reason being is that it is handled appropriately and administered appropriately. So in the situation where we have an exposure, we know that that animal was given the vaccine appropriately to mount an immune response so that it will be protected. A risk assessment is always conducted, and if a person is in need of treatment, they will be getting treatment far before they would ever become infectious and be able to spread it to someone. And our treatment is almost 100% effective if given before symptoms start.